Hello and welcome to today's episode of Platinum Talks Wealth. Emmy Nominated journalist Jennifer Rogers Markwell changed gears in her television career when she realized the need to help women make sense of investing. She regularly hosts educational workshops to empower women and others to take charge of their financial future. Now, join your host, Platinum Wealth Management President Jennifer Rogers Markwell, as she leads us into the world of money memories, money infidelities, and how these can mold our relationship with our personal finances as adults. Let's dive into today's episode.
It's Jennifer Rogers Markwell, and you're joining us on the Platinum Talks Wealth podcast. Today, I'm joined by Nancy Fahmy. Nancy, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so tell us all about you and why you do what you do.
Well, I have to say, I feel like I landed my dream job. I work for a company out of the West Coast in Seattle for Russell Investments. And the job that I have is a business consultant to financial advisors. So when I tell my children what I do, I tell them I'm a coach for other financial advisors who have a really unique and fun job in helping clients meet their financial outcomes. And I help them do that better. So that's how I explain it to my twin 11-year-old girls and my 7-year-old son. But when I think about how I describe it, in my everyday life, we partner with thousands of financial advisors across several continents to really help them transform their businesses, their practices, to provide really great client outcomes. And we do that in two specific ways. First, we are an investment management firm. So we provide investment solutions to help them really bring institutional quality, sort of multi-manager approach to helping manage risk, to help them managing really the health of their clients' wealth. The second part of that is where my team comes in as business coaches, business consultants. And we've been doing this for over 20 years. Is we partnered with advisors to help them be much more client-centered, more efficient in how they run their business, more profitable, and more sustainable into the future because the model is changing even as we speak. So we know taking time out of the business to work on it is not easy. So that's why my team exists. We philosophically believe that success is never static. It really takes a lot of commitment to continuously refine and elevate their businesses. So that's really where my team comes in.
So how did you get on this path? I mean, were you a little younger person and thought, this is what I'm going to do forever? Like, I know this is what I'm going to do. How did you get here?
It's funny you should say that. So I remember vividly watching my dad come home every single day from the office. He had a financial services career. And I just know that I was really enamored by it. My mother worked as well. She was a real estate agent, but I just loved, my father would come home. I just remember the briefcase and, even on the weekends, he'd be crunching numbers. He was the CFO in the role that he occupied at his company. And I think what really solidified it was, I remember going to his office. It was take your daughter to work day. And I just remember how much respect he had from everyone from the parking attendant to the receptionist when we first walked into his office to his admin who would help, ask me if I wanted anything to drink or eat, to his colleagues. And I just remember thinking, wow, my father is my father at home. But when he comes to this office, he's something else. He's someone else. He's a really crucial part to this business, whatever that business was. And I didn't really understand it. And that's really what kind of gave me the bug to kind of get into the financial services industry. And so I started off that way, really kind of working my way up. But to answer your question, I'll never forget the very first person who hired me. It was a summer internship with the company that my father worked at. And I finished the entire summer and I thought I did a great job. He was very pleased. And he said, we'd like you to come back next summer. And he said, let me just give you one piece of advice. And I was probably a sophomore or junior in college at that point. And he said, it's going to be really hard to figure out what you want to do in life for a career. I said, uh-oh, is this really advice or is this making me feel worse? But he said, but every job you take, it will get you one step closer to the job that you love. And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it. So to where I am today, 24 years later, I can honestly say every position I had within the financial services industry really sort of led me to the job that I'm in today, helping financial advisors really create phenomenal businesses and coaching them through that. Because up until that point, I was doing a lot of other things in and around that world, but I wasn't actually coaching and enabling and supporting that business for them. And it is the most fulfilling thing I think I could think of. So I can only think about 26 years ago when he said, you'll know by taking other jobs, but eventually you'll figure it out based on what you don't want to do and what you do want to do.
That's great advice. I mean, because looking back, I think everybody who's listening, looking back is like, oh, that maybe wasn't my favorite moment in my, in my lifetime, but like definitely a stepping stool to get you to where you are now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I know you also from basically you public speaking and sharing about women in investing, which is a whole big thing that's even getting bigger, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
We talk about the wealth transfer going to women, and you and I were chatting briefly before. That number's gotten even bigger. So it was a big adult, large number before, and now it's even larger.
Even larger. Yes. So this is a topic that's absolutely near and dear to my heart, knowing I have a mother and sister-in-laws and daughters and cousins, and knowing that at some point, 9 out of 10 women will be in control of their own finances at some point in their life. That's a big number. And when I think about the industry in terms of how it's serving client relationships, the number that's really important for us to understand is that the largest generational transfer of wealth is about to happen here in the United States. It's actually in our country's history, $84 trillion with a T is going to be passed down from the existing boomer generation, which has most of the assets today, right? They have done a phenomenal job of accumulating their wealth. That's going to get passed down to the next decision makers, which will be, right, the Gen X generation, right? The generation that I'm a part of. But in between that will be the surviving spouse. And for anyone that follows statistics or census data, typically speaking, women will outlive male counterparts by 4 to 5 years. That's according to the Census Bureau. So the chances that a female will inherit the assets first once her spouse or partner passes is very high. And that's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And then ultimately the Gen X next decision makers will take over those assets. But I think about how much that's going to impact all the women in our lives. They're going to be in control of these assets. And for the first time, for many of them, it will be their first time, right? Many of the women that we talk to say, I typically defer decision-making around our finances to my spouse. And that's something that can feel daunting for women at some point, especially later in life, to have to manage those decisions without the help of their spouse, and why financial advisors are so incredibly important to that picture.
Well, and the landscape is changing, not only through inheritances and money transfers, but women are making more. You had a great quote, and I'm going to not say it right, but it was like, you're getting it through working harder, through divorce, and then through something else. And that's so true, because I feel like women are coming into their own for sure.
Yeah. So whether women earn it, marry it, divorce it, inherit it, they're going to be in control of it at some point in their life. So 9 out of 10 women will have to be making those decisions. And women have a lot more financial freedom than they did 40, 50 years ago. Think about this. Think about our mothers and even our grandmothers' generation, when they felt there was not as much choice when it came to marriage. For instance, that's a topic that really comes up a lot in my conversations and talks. 50 years ago, women felt that the only way they could be financially independent was to get married, right? And to have that stable spouse making that traditional income. Today, that's simply not the case. Women are deferring marriage. They're opting not to get married. They're opting to have families without a spouse. Single parenting is very popular. We see gray divorces taking place. So in the country, yes, statistically speaking, I hate to say it, 50% of marriages will typically end in a divorce. However, the statistic that I think is very interesting is that 70% of women will actually initiate the divorce, not the male.
Wow.
It's the
Wow.
female. And we find that that's simply because they are in a place of comfort when it comes to their vocation and work-life balance, meaning they're earning income, they're dual income earners, and they feel that they can make decisions that are the best for them and not necessarily feeling stuck in a marriage based on just the finances. So with women choosing to not get married, to have families without another partner, to initiate divorce later in life, these are happening more and more. So it's really kind of almost to the point where we have to get people prepared for this because it's already happening. The train is out of the station, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. On a side note to that too, even folks who are in, coupling situations that are happy in their marriages or whatever their arrangement looks like as well. One thing that I find interesting is you're right. There's always a dominant person in that financial conversation. One thing that I like to share, and I know that you have as well, is there's a seat for everyone at the table. And it's so important that everyone is sitting at that table together, that one person's not missing from the conversation. Because in those situations, like you had said, Lord forbid something happens to your partner, whatever that looks like, then you're at that table by yourself. So have those conversations, make sure that you're there and present and that you're active in taking that responsibility as well.
Absolutely. And I've done a lot of research around this. When we look at reasons why women defer decision making, I can understand it because I live it every single day of my life. I'm a part of a dual income family, right? My husband works, I work. We have very busy lives. And as women in particular, we're juggling so many competing priorities, whether it's, household responsibilities, children responsibilities, managing the household household budgeting. When it comes to financial decisions, market related decisions, investing in the markets, the capital markets, even the most educated of women that are high earners will tend to defer those decisions to someone else. And so to your point, when it comes time to have to make those decisions, it can feel overwhelming and daunting to say it's too stressful. I don't know where to start. I don't want to make a mistake if I ask the wrong question. I don't want to come off as not being intelligent. I call that the perfectionist flaw that women tend to have. If we're not absolutely perfect at something, we tend to sort of defer to not doing it. But to your point, it's so important that we have a seat at the table. And I encourage the advisors that I work and coach, when they sit down and do that discovery conversation with a spouse, right, a husband and a wife, it's imperative that the female sits down with them to really understand what is her North Star, what is her philosophy around money, what does she want for herself, for her family, in addition or in conjunction with her partner, right? It's not a one or the other, it's both. And when I tell advisors to have that discovery conversation, it usually doesn't start with the words, how much, right? How much do you have? How much will you need if one of you passes? How much income do you think you need to live off of in retirement? Those are all great questions, by the way, but those are not true discovery questions. And discovery is about understanding what each partner wants from a why, a place of why this matters to them, not just the what and the how, but why is this such an important thing for us to solve and to work on and to create goals around? So discovery is not about asking the how muches.
Yeah, true. And I think even with, same sex couples, and again, however your coupling looks, I think regardless of having that partnership, it's having these discussions. And that really goes back to also what we talk about here on the podcast is money memories. So there's always that interesting money memory, right? That you had as a kid or a younger person or a teenager that helped mold your relationship to money as an adult, right? I think that's interesting to have that conversation with your partner as well, to find out why they tick the way they do, like what happened there, what seed was planted years ago from, a generational situation that made them the way that they are. So that's a question I'll ask you too, Nancy. What's a money memory that you had as a younger person or, that really helped mold your relationship to money as an adult?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's true. Money, it's really about associations, either negative, positive, right? It's all about what biases we formed around money when we were young, when we're in our younger years. It really does affect how we decide, how we make decisions, how we maybe, reflect when it comes to being in a partnership, a union. So the first one I can think of is my first job was to be an ice cream scooper down the street at a local sort of Amish market. There was lots of different stands, and an ice cream stand was one of them. And I wanted to earn my own money. So I started as an ice cream scooper. I never forget, I used to have bruises on the side on my arm here as I would reach down. I was so short, I couldn't get into the ice cream buckets as much as I'd like to. But I started earning money that summer, and I told my parents I wanted to open a bank account. So they took me down to the local bank, which in my town, I don't think they exist any longer. Core States was the name of the bank. I remember it. And we walked in, we met with the bank manager. She sat us down at her table and she said, okay, we're going to open up an account. And I think the most exciting part of that for me was getting my checkbook. The idea that it was going to have my name on it. It was going to have, I could write checks and I could balance the checkbook. I was so methodical about balancing it to the dollar, to the cent. And it was the first time in my life I felt true ownership of making decisions for myself. And the reason why that was so important to me, even at a very young, kind of tenuous age, was, I believe, shaped by my upbringing. I am a product of immigrant family. They came to the United States in the 1960s, and they immigrated from Egypt. And they really, truly lived the American dream. They believed in hard work and really earning everything that they've done. And my brother and I were raised with this sort of mindset, this work ethic of you can be anything you want, right? And it's going to be a matter of how much grit and effort and time and energy you put into it. But because my parents came here with relatively nothing, you could imagine, Jennifer, they were quite frugal, right? They were very tight budget, right? So every decision that was made, from vacations to cars to clothing to extracurricular activities, was genuinely mulled over and really decided upon in a very rational manner. It was, do we need this? It's not, do we want this? And as much as I appreciate and value the lessons that my parents taught me around money and investing, it also shaped who I was and who I am today. So I chose a career knowing that I wanted to make my own money. I wanted to have the ability to dictate how I spent my money that I earned. And by getting that job at 13 and having my own bank account meant that I could start making decisions on my behalf and not necessarily be dictated by my old school parents, who came from another country and didn't want to spend a nickel, right? So it really kind of propelled me. And that's a money memory that I genuinely believe shapes everything I do today.
Yeah, that's huge. And I mean, how great for your kids to see kind of where you've been, what you've done, and imagine where they're going to be just from, the runway that you've provided for them.
I would at least hope so. I hope my husband and I are doing a good job. Sometimes we feel like we spoil them, and all the things I didn't get to have, I have to stop myself from wanting to give it to them so easily. I think that happens when it comes to the second generation, right? Where you're now like, well, I didn't get half the things that I'm giving you. I want you to be appreciative. And sometimes it's hard for them to do that because they don't know anything else. So that's another thing I think parents have to contend with, is if you grew up with a certain set of rules or standards or values around money, it's a different world now than 30 years ago. It just genuinely is.
For sure. No, but I hear you on the wanting folks to be grateful, right? So my 13-year-old, my mini me, right? My stepdaughter, same thing, right? We obviously want to instill in her a nice work ethic, but we also want to provide for her things that we didn't have growing up too. But it's finding that balance in between of making sure that they are not taking things for granted, that they know that work goes into things. And I think it's really like in our household, it's if we travel or do anything, we're also working. We carve time out to work, and they're like, it's one of those things where the mentality is, okay, we work hard so we can also play hard as well. And there's got to be like a balance between that. And she sees that. So I'm sure you're same with your family.
Yeah. I mean, something as simple as last week, my daughters finished the last week of their summer camp, and they had day trips to various places. One was a water park, one was a theme park. And I was getting into this cadence where they would text message me that they needed money I needed to airdrop it into their wallet, their Apple wallet. And for the first few times, I just did it sort of blindly. And I thought, oh yes, they need lunch. They're out all day long. And then I realized, I think I'm doing this the wrong way. Right. And then I remembered how my parents approached me and thought maybe take some of those sort of values that I had and say, well, here's what I'm giving you for the week. It's a static number, however way you choose to use it for that week. So if you're going to use it all at the water park on Monday, you're not going to have much by Friday when you're at the Six Flags, theme park. So just something as small as that, I realized I could be instilling some sort of, money or investment sort of philosophy around being mindful of how we spend, how we invest.
That's a good one. That's a good one for sure.
Yeah.
So another thing that I think is an important conversation for, your partner, your family, whatnot, is really talking through financial infidelities, which can mean different things to different people. I talked to a gal whose partner went out and bought a brand new car, rolled in it, in the driveway, and was like, well, that would have been a nice conversation for us to have since it was our money. So literally anything across the board for financial infidelities. What's one that you've either experienced or that you witnessed that you think others could learn from?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think when we sort of think about what financial infidelity is, like by definition, I think it comes off as like, you're doing something behind your family or partner's back in the way of breaking trust around money, right? And that's technically what it is, but it could be small, it could be big. Something
Right.
small in my life is, do I hide some of the boxes that come from Amazon so I don't have to have an uncomfortable conversation? Yeah, I've done that, right? We've all done that. But one that sort of resides with me that's much larger and more pervasive, I would say, is actually an example of an advisor I was coaching. And he was sharing with me that the clients that he was meeting with, the husband and the wife had very different philosophies around money, around investing, because of the way they were raised, the way they grew up, and how different their lives were from the perspective of one. The female came from a pretty affluent, upper middle class family. Money was of no issue. If she wanted to spend it, it was there. Whereas the husband really grew up in a family that was super, on top of budgets and being really tight with their money. And so when they got married, they had sort of a very different lens. They almost reversed back to the opposite of how they were brought up. So the husband was now the spender and the wife was now the saver, because she didn't want to sort of see the results of what her family were, because they were such spenders when she was young. They couldn't retire comfortably, in their later 70s. But the example he said was he was doing a discovery meeting, and the financial infidelity he was able to uncover during a discovery conversation was, the husband's family, the husband was upset that the wife's family, the father and mother, because they were such big spenders growing up, they didn't save enough for retirement. And they had bought into these really expensive insurance policies that they could no longer afford to pay the premiums on. And so they essentially asked his wife and the other two sisters, there were 3 girls, to essentially cover the cost of those premiums every year. And
Wow.
he didn't know. So every year she was writing a check, and it was a pretty high check. It was a pretty expensive check. And one day came across this payment to an insurance company and said, well, what is this? I didn't think we had a policy with this company. And she said, actually, it's my parents' policy. And me and my 2 sisters are paying for it because my parents can't afford it. But we're going to be the beneficiaries of it. So she tried to sort of make it sound like, no, this is in our best interest. And what took him such by surprise was, I understand that. And I understand you're just trying to be a good daughter, but you didn't talk to me about it, and I don't, that's an example where when I was talking to the advisor and I said, how do you coach through that? Right. And he said, I just wanted to be the facilitator to help them unpack that conversation and really get to why she felt she couldn't share it or didn't want to share it with him and why he was so taken aback by it. Right. So financial infidelity can be as small as an Amazon box. It can be as large as writing a check to an insurance company to cover your parents' financial mishaps, if you will.
Yeah. Being impeccable to yourself with your finances, right? Or being impeccable to others with finances.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. So as we start to kind of wrap things up, one thing I like to ask is, what are tips and or tricks that you use to utilize money differently in your own household?
So I love my husband to death. He's a great guy. He is, if anyone who knows him knows he is extremely good at researching things before he does it. We have a very different way of approaching investing in money. I tend to be a lot more emotional when I make decisions. If I like it, I want it, I get it. His is much more, is it rational? Does it make sense? Is it affordable? Can I get it better somewhere else? So, I think the funniest thing I could think of is he was able to uncover this great way of accessing vehicles, cars, which we know has been not easy for the last few years, right? With the post-pandemic supply shortage and the demand increase, I think it's gotten a little bit better. But he was able to find something called Swap a Lease, where it's essentially a marketplace for people to dispose of their lease payments because they simply don't want to make them anymore. Maybe they can't afford them. Maybe they just don't like the car anymore. It could be a number of reasons why people would want to get out of their lease. So it sort of becomes a secondary market for them to say, here's my lease of my BMW. I've got 2 years left. Somebody like my husband can then go in and assume the lease and not have to pay any of the charges or fees that you would normally have to pay at the front end of a lease. And it becomes this really great marketplace for people to, unload a car that they don't want anymore. Somebody who wants to get into a car can take that lease payment. So that's an example of rational car buying or leasing of a car. I would have just went to a local dealer that had, a supply of cars that was handy and ready to go. And I would have probably paid the highest possible price, right? He found this exchange, the secondary exchange, to be able to do it. And he's had some really nice cars in the last few years, and he gets to kind of change them every couple of years. So that's just one thing that I wanted to share with your audience today. Check it out. We're also big fans of Vrbo. I'm sure everyone knows what Vrbo is. It used to be VRBO. It's Vrbo. We love using Vrbo when we travel. We want to feel pretty connected to the community or the area that we're in and kind of become a local, so we use that service quite often. And, when it comes to saving and investing, every decision we make together. But when it comes to spending on like the family, the kids, the sports, the activities, the camps, you're looking at her. That's my department. So we've been able to find a nice kind of yin yang with each other in terms of decision making.
And I think communication, regardless, is so important and so key in all of those decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing everything today.
It's my pleasure. It's been great to be have this conversation with you, Jennifer. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And hopefully those of you listening will join us on the next Platinum Talks Wealth podcast.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, Platinum Talks Wealth, please subscribe and share. For more information about Jennifer Rogers Markwell or Platinum Wealth Management, please visit www.platinumwealth.net. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member of FINRA and SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and their companies are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Platinum Wealth Management.